Good evening. I want to thank everybody for coming out to the December 2020, the last month of 2020, school board meeting. Ms. Kinzer, will you call the roll?
Ms. Parker? Here. Ms. Kinzer's here. Ms. Hopkins? Here. Mr. Fulbright?
Here.
Mr. Moore?
Present.
Ms. Urban? Present. Mr. Sims?
Here.
Mr. Hooper?
Here.
Mr. Howell? Mr. Howell is present. Mr. Lindsay?
Here.
And Mr. Dudley. We have a quorum.
Great. We do want to point out that we do have Mr. Howell joining us from his beautiful study, it looks like, or kitchen table one, just like my house. At this time, we're going to open our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we've tried something new this month. Since we usually have little kids up here with us to do it, we have brought them in via video. So this is Miss Wilson's class from Woodard going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. And now we'll observe a moment of silence. Okay, thank you very much. At this time, I will entertain motions to accept the agenda. Ms. Kinzer made the motion, seconded by Ms. Parker. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll vote.
Please vote now.
Oh, hang on one second. Okay. Mine is going to pop up as a yes. I just got the confirmation. All right, the agenda's approved. We do have some recognitions that we would like to do at this time. I know normally it's customary for the board chair to come down and take part, but since my only option was going to be to shake your hand as you got it, I thought shaking hands would not be a good idea. So I want to pass along my congratulations nonetheless.
Good evening, Board. Obviously, we're going to now give out the tenure awards for all those who earned tenure last school year. We didn't get a chance to give them out this summer because of the pandemic, and we're going to do so now. So what I'll do is I'll call your name, and if you would come up, and Jack is going to take your picture. If you just hold open your certificate, that's the best and safest thing that we can do tonight, okay? All right, so I'll call up your name. I'll put on my glasses so I can see your name first. Okay. Cameron Allred. No, you'll go and sit back down. Yeah, you go and sit back down, yeah. Okay, Jesse Alexander. Okay, Miss Alexander, we'll give hers later. Lauren Bell. I don't believe Miss Bell will be here this evening. Mary Rose Brantley. Okay. Sit her to the side. Mia Costa. No, Miss Costa. Catherine Crutcher. Congratulations, Ms. Crutcher. Okay. Allison DeMastis. Melissa DeChamps. Marcia Grimm. Amanda Hargrove. Jennifer Holmes. Tiffany Horn. Laura Irvine. Allison Cottrell. Sarah Lane. Emily Little. Rachel McMahon. Valerie Nesbitt. Dara Owens. Shannon Parson. Jasmine Rich. Jessica Sowell. Beth Thompson. Jillian Van Warmer. Congratulations to you. Jessica Vasquez. Abby White. Rebecca Wicker. Chelsea Woody. Jesse Alexander. I think we're back to the beginning. All right. The rest of our awardees will make arrangements to get this to them at their schools. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say on behalf of the Murray County School Board and on behalf of all the parents in Murray County, thank you for your dedication, your hard work, and as this year has been a completely upside down year, thank you for your guidance and leadership and continuing to love our kids every day. Thank you all. And now I'll turn the floor over to our representative from Murray County Educators Association. Ms. Inc., good to have you here this evening.
Great to be here. Thank you again, Chair Fulbright and Board for giving us this opportunity to speak on behalf of the employees of Murray County Schools. It was nice to see teachers being recognized tonight. I think teachers have gone through a lot this year, and it was nice to see them recognized. Normally there'd be a whole lot more teachers here, but like going to school every day, I think there's some concern and fear with attending events and even attending their employment. So as we move forward into this holiday season, we want to make sure that teachers feel safe and secured, that they can enjoy their holidays with their family, and that even students and parents, we want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to be learning in a safe environment. I'm going to tell you this. I went through my first round of remote learning with my fourth grader. I have a bloodshot red eye. I think I'd like to blame on remote learning. I don't think that's necessarily it, but it was an interesting experience, and it gave me a whole new perspective for working parents who have to do remote learning. We have got to make every effort to keep kids in school, especially elementary age kids. They can't do this. And I can teach everybody in this school, this room's kid. I wasn't built to teach my own kid. It's a whole different situation. Sorry, I had to add a little humor. It was a lot as a teacher and as a parent. We have to make sure we can keep kids in school. That is the optimal learning environment for kids. Remote learning, you know, you've got middle schoolers who are kind of left to their own devices, which means I can figure out how to work my video game, but I can't figure out how to work the computer. It's just not optimal. So we want to, I don't know the answer to make sure everybody's safe. You can find one answer and then find an opposing answer somewhere else. But we have a lot of teachers who are concerned about spending the holidays with their family. They've been a year without seeing their family, and it's hard. We're going into this next month, not knowing what the FMLA is going to look like. And I think this is at least the fourth month I've come forward and say, we don't know our sick leave balances. That's concerning. I've had teachers reach out to me that have said, I'm losing pay because of my sick leave balance. This has gone on, and I brought it up at the Teacher Advisory Council in October, and we were told that, Mr. Hickman, correct me if I'm wrong, that we'd know within a couple weeks. And we're sitting here in December, still not knowing our sick leave balances. This is not okay. We have people who are losing income through no real fault of their own, because they think they have this many days and they take the days because they're sick. So I just go forward again, wanting to make sure that we're educating kids in the safest environment possible. And also making sure that our employees know where they stand. We don't know. You know, I'm not the healthiest person on the planet. If I get COVID, I'm probably gonna be out more than 10 days. I got the 10 days till the end of December, as far as I know, unless something's happened. We don't know at the end of December what's gonna happen. So I'm just asking that we can finally get some resolution to knowing what our sick leave balances are. I don't really think that's too much to ask as an employee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we owe that to our teachers to be able to find that and to do that. And I will echo your comments. I had my first experience with remote learning the week before Thanksgiving, and I have a master's degree in education, and my son may now fail kindergarten after being with me 3 days. It is not an experience. Teaching your own kid is quite a different experience. So thank you. Thank you for being with us this evening. Any public delegations signed up to speak? Okay, we have none. Staff reporting, Mr. Hickman. I'll turn it over to you or anybody that would like to report for us. Have anything? Okay, we'll cover everything else during the meeting. We have our consent items. Hopefully you've had a chance to look through these. I have a motion to approve the consent items. There are 27 of them. Seconded by Ms. Parker. The motion was made by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on the consent items? Seeing none, we'll vote.
Please vote now.
All right, that passes unanimously, so we will move on to new business. Finance, Mr. Laconin.
So the first item is 8.1.1, internal school funds accounting for athletics. We met last Tuesday, myself, the superintendent, David Huss, basically our liaison for getting guidance on the internal school bookkeeping manual. He's a CPA and an attorney. Mr. Wooliver was there as well, and Mr. Perriman and Mr. Gaines, and we all went over and provided guidance. And with that, really, I'll go ahead and defer to Mr. Hickman and really the school board on next steps.
Thank you, Mr. Hickman.
Yes, I sent out a plan for looking specifically at our, how we were going to start doing our, I don't want to say rewrite, because we did have the TSBA finally did upload this week the policy as it was voted on last year. So as we do that, we are now going to comb through each one. But one of the big ones before we can start is where we're going to have a vote from the board on the alternative 1 or alternative 2 that we had spoke to you guys about at the last work session, and we put both of those on there for you guys to see. And I think we explained, I think last time, the difference between the two. And the district, we are here to recommend that we look at taking alternative 1 as the preferred method. And I'll open up to any question.
Thank you. I just have a couple. Mr. Laconin, did you have any, recommendation from your end? I know it's not really your place, but you are kind of the expert in accounting.
Yeah, there we go. The good news is, under both of these alternatives, it lets the bookkeeper and the principal manage individual accounts for the sports. You can still keep track of those individual accounts. Just know that alternative 1 is going to basically protect you using a blanket accounting athletics account that is the combination of all of the sports. And so that balance prevents, one sport going under. You don't subject yourself to an audit finding because that general account covers that balance. Something I would say is, and my recommendation to Michael was, all schools, after we went through, they do it differently. We have a couple schools that do accounting alternative 2. Spring Hill Middle School is one of them, and we have many schools that use accounting alternative 1, and you as a school board can decide each individual school. You can leave it the way it is, you can choose accounting alternative 1 for all schools, but just remember that if you make a decision for all schools, that if you take somebody from alternative 2 to 1, that's really easy to do, because they're already keeping up with it individually. All they have to do is add up their individual balance, and they have a general athletics account. But if you take somebody from alternative 1 to 2, and they don't have these things broken out, then they're gonna have to do a lot of research and a lot of work to get it divvied out appropriately to meet the compliance of alternative 2. So that is just something to consider. My recommendation in the meeting was to find out what the individual schools are doing and change the purchasing policy to protect us from a bill getting this large in the future. So I would go with what the schools are doing now, because they're all doing it differently. The majority is using accounting alternative 1, but I would also say and yield to Mr. Hickman and Mr. Woolever on recommending alternative 1. I just prefer that you either leave it the same, which is, you know, we discovered that some schools are doing certain alternatives, but give clear guidance that you would like for them to stay on those accounting methods. So that's a long-winded statement basically to say, stick with what you have, or just know the consequences of choosing either alternative. My recommendation would be to go with Mr. Hickman's recommendation, because by law, this is something him and the principals are responsible for and you are responsible for. But me, as providing guidance to him, I would prefer either they all stay on the alternative they're on. The good news is you can procedurally implement what you need to do with alternative 1 without having as much restriction from policy. So you leave it, if you choose alternative 1, you leave the procedure in the hands of the superintendent and the principals to keep a watchful eye on those funds. If you change it, then you possibly incur your own more full of teeth policy under alternative 2.
Thank you. It sounds like alternative 2 may have more repercussions when the audit is completed, perhaps. Mr. Hickman, is there a potential to leave things the way they are at each of the schools and prepare them in the next fiscal year to all transition to one or the other, which sounds like one is kind of the recommendation of the entire brain trust here? Is that a possibility?
I think that is always a possibility, but one of the things I want to caution is, as we start digging into some of these policies that we need to write, we need a kind of a definitive answer of which way the board wants to go, because obviously we want to do some procedural things, whichever method you choose. One, looking at budgets for the athletic departments. Two, making a procedure about accounts going negative. And you know, when we do those types of policies, if we go to option 2, some of that we won't have to write because it fits what alternative 2 says.
Okay. Then to just jump in there and clarify something, then if we voted tonight to do one or the other, could we then set it to, and Jake, this may be, can we set it then to take effect July 1st? Or is that still leaving too much muddy water between now and then?
I mean, you've been operating this way. We don't know. I mean, there may have been some precedent out there for option 1 or 2 in the past. Given the fact that we've never had an audit finding on this, and given the fact that option 1 seems to be prevalent, then it stands to reason that at some point the board has chosen that. So, yeah, I think Mr. Hickman wants some direction going forward if you want to upset the apple cart and go a different direction. But yes, certainly the board could choose an option and then delay its start time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lindsay?
If we choose option 1, Mr. Hickman, how do we make sure that the situation we're dealing with now never happens again? How do we make sure that one sport doesn't overspend the money they have and we have to find a way to make that deficit up?
In talking to principals this week, first of all, there were some principals weren't even sure what alternative they were doing. and it's been kind of confusing talking to the principals, and some said, oh, we're doing alternative one, and then when I spoke to them, well, this is what alternative one says, they're like, oh, no, that's not the one we're doing. What comes in next, and after our meeting we had, the way you do that is you have to make sure that you set a procedural guidelines for, you can have it specifically for the athletic accounts, which I think it should be overall for all accounts, that they do not incur debt that puts them into a negative balance. I think it will take, because some of these schools have been living with the procedure, if you would, we know we're gonna make it back later, so we're gonna go ahead and spend it now, that it will take some time for some of these schools to build that money up to pay for it. One of the big examples that's been given and thrown out there is football helmets. They have to be reconditioned every year, and some of the schools have gone with the thought, well, we know we'll get that $6,000 back at this date. So we have to give them time to say, you've got to get your accounts built up to pay forward instead of in the rears. Now, with that said, we still will not be okay with negative balances. I would like, to start the procedure, putting a 90-day or June 30th, whichever comes first, to have this bill paid. But it would all come back to making sure we set these procedures, we enforce these procedures, and make sure we are clear on how to follow them. One of the things that's going to benefit us is we are moving back to local government, and local government is going to be a great tool to use. It's what the county government already uses. The schools have lagged behind and had not adopted it, so we're back on that. It's going to be we'll have somebody at the district level that'll be able to not have to request where accounts are from principals, but we'll have somebody at the central office that'll be able to pull that up at any time. As well as, one of the things that we see as a potential problem is when we start looking at POs, most of those are done by hand, they're manual, and that can cause potential problems. So one of the things local government does is it will streamline the POs as a electronic one, and it will throw up, if I'm correct on this, Doug, it will let that principal, that bookkeeper know right away that account doesn't have the money.
Any other, Mr. Lindsey?
This is not a jab at you when I say this, but I struggle with putting things in procedure because it's real easy to not follow procedure. It's more difficult to not follow policy. And I understand, I was pretty adamant at the last meeting about option number 2, and as I find out more about it, I can see where option number 1 is beneficial, alternative number 1, but I still struggle with the fact that we allow sports, we allow clubs, whatever, to that alternative number 1 allows them to go in a deficit. And I would be willing to vote for alternative number 1, and I think we should do it tonight. But I would also like to see in 2 weeks we bring policy forward and add to our board policy, whichever number it will be. It may be our purchasing policy or whatever that says we're not going to spend money we don't have.
Do you have something real quick to that?
Yeah, I'll be real quick. And you can see attached on the agenda, there are multiple policies that aren't in line with the Tennessee Uniform Accounting Policy Manual that the school board adopted. And these are things that are going to be an ongoing working process. This one choice of an accounting alternative isn't going to be the end-all, be-all, fix-it for this issue happening. And specifically a fundraising policy for internal school funds, which is normally policy 2.601, other districts have it, and we don't have one in there. And something we had a lot of good ideas and a lot of good things, and honestly the manual itself had a lot of good things that are supposed to be put into our policy that were completely just for whatever reason, omitted from our policy. So if principal went and looked at our policy and then looked at the manual, they'll be like, well, that's right from the policy, except these 2 bullet points are left out. So I don't want to expound on this too long, but there are other policies that would be updated that will help prevent this from happening again. And purchasing policy 2.805 is one of them. So it's something that's going to be a work in progress, and you'll see policies come through to you specifically about those internal school funds in the near future.
Thank you. Ms. Kinzer?
Oh, I'll try to be brief too. I just want board members to keep in mind that not that we don't keep in mind, we've been through a pandemic, and there were a lot of sports that were affected by this, by not being able to have their fundraising for things they had to have and purchased. And I've thought about it too. I think alternative one is the only way for us to go. I do agree that making it begin July 1, but I think about, I was a cheerleading sponsor for a couple of years, and when we ordered uniforms, there was fall billing. That's standard. I also was a pep club sponsor for more years than I'd like to say, and we would have to order maybe 500 T-shirts before I ever took a penny in. Jones and Lang knew that. They knew, that's just the way it worked. And so I had a pretty tough athletic director that would, you think you can sell these? Yes. I'm sure that happens with football or anyone that needs equipment. I do want to keep in mind that I'm sure that all of these revenue sports are really hurting right now. And so I think it's great that this was brought to our attention and that we're looking at it and we're understanding and learning. But I want you to keep in mind that I think that a lot of this wouldn't have occurred with other sports as well because they could have done fundraisers.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Parker?
I agree with what Mr. Lindsay said about the procedure aspect of it, and we've seen policy not be followed, and I know procedures have not been followed in the past. But as a board member, it gives me a little bit more comfort if it's in policy, because that's where our power is. That's what we've always been told at TSBA conferences and whatnot. But one thing I would like to see procedurally in policy, whatnot, is making sure that people are notified of what they owe, either up front or shortly thereafter when things are purchased. Because I think part of the issue with what we saw at the work session was that bills were not sent timely to parents to be paid, and COVID was not an excuse for that. It just wasn't. It has nothing to do with fundraisers. Either you purchased a cheerleading bow or you didn't purchase a cheerleading bow, and it should be very clear who owes that money, and that should be very easy to collect. So I don't think that we need to, I don't necessarily want to get bogged down in the details of what happened in one particular instance, but it was not handled well, and that cannot be just glossed over by saying we're going to fix this by adopting one of these alternatives, because to me, the problem itself has not been solved.
Mr. Howell?
So, I tend to agree with Mr. Lindsay, actually. I first was all for alternative number 2. I think that even though there are some sports that offset costs of others, I know that in some schools, there are ways to do that. There are ways that revenue-generating sports can pay non-revenue-generating sports to, provide services for them, and that in turn funds the non-revenue sports. But I do see like a time when alternative 1 could be beneficial. One problem that I have with alternative 1 is I think it's a good accounting practice when it says subsidiary accounts may be established. I kind of have a problem with that. I think from an accounting standpoint, we should definitely know where everyone stands. And not just a maybe, we have enough money. I think we should definitely know that there are several revenue-generating sports, and then there are some that are not. And I think that it should be specified in the policy that they have to have sub-accounts so that we know just from an accounting standpoint, where everyone stands. That's all.
Okay, thank you. I see no other lights. Would anybody like to make a motion regarding this?
I will. Okay.
We have a motion to approve alternative one
With July 1, the way it's written here.
with the way it's written here. Mr. Lindsay, clarify your motion.
Yes, I'll accept it with the way it's written here. I expect us moving forward in the next few months to take care of some of my concerns through policy rather than here.
I agree. Okay, at an effective start date?
It's in the motion.
Is it,
I'll lean
Oh,
on
okay.
Mr. Wolver for that. I mean, part of me thinks that we've skirted our responsibility maybe out of ignorance by not having it, but then if you recommend us waiting till the end of this fiscal year, I'll lean on you for that.
No, I'd recommend you make it effective tonight. I mean, if you were going the other direction, I would like you to give some lead time, but, option one seems to be the more prevalent and is the less restrictive of the two, so I would say that's what you're doing now. Let's codify it effective immediately.
Effective
okay,
immediately.
so we have a motion on the floor. Ms. Kinzer, were you gonna second that? Okay, Mr. Moore.
And Mr. Wolver, if I could clarify, I mean, from what I understand, legally, we just have to pick one.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we have to make them implement it tonight. We just have to have one that's our policy, we've set, and we can give them some grace on transitioning the books, correct?
Technically,
As long as we
all
pick
of them
one.
are already in compliance
Okay.
with alternative one anyways, so.
Okay.
Okay, the only thing I see, we do need to remove the July 1st, 2021 start date out of the motion. And we could just put effective 12/2/20, or 12/1/20 for that matter. Or effective on approval, whatever. Okay, so the motion reads, approving alternative one accounting method for athletics. You can see all the details there. Effective December 1st. If you vote yes, you will be voting to approve that. If you vote no, you will not be approving that. I think we're ready to vote.
Please vote now.
We have a unanimous result on that one. Moving on to number 2, Central High School Athletic Finances. And Mr. Laconin, I want to just preface this. I believe since we were focusing on a specific instance at our meeting, we got some interest from the Tennessee State Comptroller, if I believe. Could you kind of give us a little clarification on that, on what we put ourselves in?
So, I was emailed by the comptroller's office, and so was Mr. Hickman. The particular fraud auditor, reached out to us and asked about particular documents and the discussion we had at our work session and wanted more insight onto what we were talking about. So, we sent him the documents, which they were on the agenda. He already had them. He specifically wanted to know who provided them and what was our discussion like and specifically about. And I emailed him back and told them why it was on the agenda, told them why we were meeting to rectify the issue from happening in the future, and let him know if I could be of any assistance in the future. The good news is I got a reply back from him, and he said, "Thank you very much for the quick turnaround. I do appreciate it." So he's really working to have the matter resolved as quickly as possible. So he's asking for us to be in touch, and they want to have a meeting once they conclude the investigation. So with that said, I think there's an opportunity in which we could have a resolution from this pretty soon if we stay out of his way.
Okay. Thank you. And the reason I wanted to clarify that is to reiterate the point that I brought up at the work session. We are looking at instances going forward. There's already an entity looking at the incidents of the past. So let us look at what's going forward. Mr. Hickman, do you have anything to bring for us? I believe we had asked you for some information.
I do. You guys asked, the board had asked that I get with, the Central High School principal, Mr. White, and provide a plan on how he was going to proceed in making sure this debt was paid. We worked with him, and we, had listed that as an attachment onto the agenda, and you guys, give me a second, my computer is really acting up. And I know it's 8.1.2, and it should be listed as it's about middle of the way, and it's 2020-21 repayment plan.
I have it here if you can't pull yours up.
On this payment plan, if you have it open, the very top is showing what debt is owed by students currently. That makes up the remaining balance of the paying off varsity. And then when you scroll to the bottom and then to page 2, you will see the money that the team is anticipating on collecting on funds, and get to page 2. And it shows the total sum at the end, and we will be touching base with him on these due dates that he's listed and making sure that these funds were collected where he's at on those.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hickman? Ms. Parker?
From a review of this repayment plan, it looks like, there's parents' nights, Titans, those type of things. I assume those are being done by the current year's cheerleaders, is that correct?
It is correct, because we're kind of painted into a corner on this one. I know one of the desires of the board is about raising funds this year for last year, but we're kind of in a place where the options are very limited, and to have this done, but they will fundraise to make enough money for current year as well as go back and pay. One of the things that was brought to my attention was a lot of the debt incurred was not just some of your uniform type things, it was stuff that even the current year's team is also using. And Mr. Perryman, I know you spoke with Mr. White in depth. Do you have anything to add about some of the things that were purchased?
Some of the items are items that carried over. They weren't just the uniforms that were a one-time use. These are things that they have continued to use this year and will into the future. And then the only other thing really, we asked them when they estimated these revenues that they thought they would generate from their fundraising, we asked to give the minimum amount that they thought they would make. They estimate that in all of these cases they will make more than they actually have shown here. They also have agreed with us that as we monitor them month by month, if they are not meeting those goals, that they will come up with alternative ways that they can raise money that doesn't put a huge burden on the children, that doesn't put a huge burden on this year's squad, but that can be done. So we've asked them to reach out to some companies that help with this type of thing as far as fundraising, different types of ideas, and just to kind of be out of the box. But this is the base of what they're looking at to clear their sum for this year.
Will the parents of the current cheerleaders be made aware they are going to be fundraising for last year's team?
As far as I know, in speaking to Mr. White, that would be made very clear to everyone, yes.
Okay. And then are we going to allow any additional expenses for this team to be incurred before this debt is paid?
What they've done this year is pretty much a pay-as-they-go. So anything from July 1 to this point, they are...
And you're sure there's
yes,
no outstanding debts with anybody?
There is no outstanding balances at all. We checked...
Aside from varsity?
Besides from the varsity bill, and really, that's the only the amount that hasn't been paid yet by the parents.
Okay.
Everything else on the school side has been cleared, but there is no outstanding... unless they've purchased something since last Wednesday, there is no outstanding balance at all on this year's debt.
We have been checking, not just through the school, but also with
local vendors
to make sure. You know, at one point, it was told to us that they'd had a debt, but the debt was there, but it was because that the bill had just been sent to the school and it was paid in a timely manner and before the bill expiration date even came.
Okay.
So it was a normal type transaction. They bought, they had to wait on the bill, they got the bill, and as soon as they got the bill, they paid the bill.
And one thing we did make sure is they did have a purchase order for this last one. There was a purchase order pulled before the order was made, and then it was paid within the time limit that the local vendor did set for them to pay.
So procedures then you feel like are being followed
Yes,
at this
Absolutely.
point?
And we are heavily monitoring that.
I think you should.
Yes.
Mr. Lindsay?
This is the last thing I'm gonna say on this. I've spent a bunch of time on this, but, we've gotta come up with procedures, policies, something to make sure this doesn't happen again. We gotta get out of the apparel business. We need to get out of we need to quit billing people. There's so many things wrong with this that we gotta get fixed moving forward, and we can't fix it tonight, we can't fix it next week, but we gotta get it fixed in a timely manner.
It'd be my assumption that this ties into the discussion we had just previously with new policies and procedures and things like that that'll go forward. Is that my understanding? Thank you. Is there any other discussion on this topic? Seeing none, let's move on. Instruction, let's talk software. Mr. Gaines.
I think you had a question about the response time, and I know Mr. Cobb had sent out some videos. I think in talking with Mr. Hickman and Mr. Cobb, the response time is not necessarily a measure that we're gonna hound people with about how long it takes us to respond or anything, but I mean, I think we'd like to use the software for the purposes of where people are asking questions about things to help us, you know, if we need to provide more information in an area, depending on where we're getting those questions from. That was one of the features of the software that we liked, and also the ability to gauge responses and things that are going on. So it was presented because it is not over $10,000, but it is an agreement, yes. Yeah, contract, I'm sorry.
Okay, is there any discussion? Mr. Lindsay?
I watched the videos Mr. Cobb sent out today and tried to do some research, but, and maybe I'm alone, but I just struggle to see the benefit, and I'm struggling to see what this software package does, what hole it's filling, where are we lacking that this is gonna make our system operate better, and I'm open to somebody explaining that to me, because I and like I said, it could just be me, but I don't see it right now.
Mr. Cobb, do you wanna address that, or any of the tech folks?
Let me preface this too, as he is on his way up here. When we started talking about it, and I know this is a new board, when we started talking about with the COVID and response and how we were gonna do things, one of the biggest board's concerns at that time was they felt uncomfortable with the measure we had to respond to teachers, to parents, to having those kind of things laid out. And this was one of the things we researched found, and it just really liked. And I'll let Mr. Cobb take it from here.
Mr. Cobb?
All right, specific question is about the benefits of it. It just pulls everything together in communications and allows us to be able to direct it more streamlined to the right people. I get emails that ask MCPS daily that I have to figure out where they're gonna go, how to answer them. Half the time I don't know, they're just off the wall emails, but I've been here long enough now that I'm starting to figure it out. But I have to filter these emails out to numerous people, and this is gonna make it automatic. And it also builds a database of different keywords and things that help you. And I've talked to other districts nearby that use it, and they think it's really great. And I have to agree, I haven't tried it yet, so I can't testify to it. I've only read about it and did some stuff with it. I haven't had a demo yet. I think it's, for this initial part, I think it's worth trying. From what I've heard from the other communications people in districts close by, that it is really worthwhile. There's a lot more to it too than just being a communications answer emails.
And we are not committed past this year?
No.
Did I remember that from the work session?
Nope, you would have to renew it for a contract for a full year in, the summer.
And I'd like to add that I have used it on both ends, because when I was in Wilson County, this is a product that they did use. And one of the benefits that this does is some of those that he explained was it helps us streamline where questions go. But it also gives us a monitoring device to make sure that these questions are being answered. It allows us to say, hey, you know, we notice principal such and such, you've had this in your queue for about 5 days, what's going on with it? And as well as doing that, you try to not be Big Brother, but it helps us to make sure that we're responding in a timely manner and the right person is responding. The other benefits it does is it has an internal message, because I may get a email or a question from a parent and I'm not 100% sure how to respond, so internally I can go to Jack and say, hey Jack, what's your take on this email as well? So it can, or this question as well. And it's a very easy, accessible way for parents to just click a button, because they don't know who people are, but they know what their question is about. They click the button, and as soon as they hit that send button, it immediately puts that person on the clock to make sure they get that question answered.
Okay. Is there any other questions or discussion? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Ms. Kinzer has made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Irvin. Seeing no other lights, I think we're ready to vote.
Please vote now.
With a vote of 6-4, that motion passes. Glasses. 2021-22 and 2022-23 school year calendar update. Mr. Gaines.
On yesterday, the calendar committee met and reviewed the survey results and answered any remaining questions about the 21, 22, 22, 23 calendars. We did make some adjustments to the one that were on the work session. In March, we had a day scheduled for parent-teacher conferences that was an early dismissal day and then had conferences from 12 to 6. That was both in school year 22 and school year 23. We adjusted that back to the way we traditionally do conferences. So those were the only changes we made, and based on the recommendation of the calendar committee, we recommend the calendars for approval.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to clarify, the reason that this was added this morning was because the meeting was yesterday and you were gathering information. Is there any discussion on the calendars? Ms. Irvin.
Mr. Gaines, thanks for putting this together. I know it's a lot of effort on your part, but I probably should have caught this at the work session, but I didn't. But I wanted to ask, I know it's been pretty standard that we take an additional day after Labor Day, which becomes a teacher work service day or in-service day. It appears that we've got the Friday prior to the whole week of Thanksgiving that we're now doing as a teacher work day. And then in March, there's the day right directly before the before the ACT test. It's also a teacher work day. So here's my questions. I'm thinking of this two ways. Is there a direct benefit to having the teachers doing that then? Because one part of my mind makes me think, if we're trying to get as many quality days of education in prior to the TCAP testing, which happens, looks like here April 11th through May 6th. I'm just, and I may be giving this too much thought, but I'm wondering, would it be more beneficial to have those kids in school those 3 days and then have teacher work sessions at the end, extended? That would also, I know, and I'm not trying to overcomplicate it, I just, wanted to see what your thoughts were on that.
Mr. Gaines?
With the planning of our professional, and those are professional development days, we try to provide professional development quarterly, where we'll have initial professional development and then follow-up. So that's why those days are kind of spread out with each quarter. There's one in September, there's one in November, there's one in March. So that was the basis around those. So far as that day being before the ACT day, it's a professional development day, and the ACT is focused on juniors, and typically they already have a plan for those students. And most days those kids are either, they may be taking it off-site, or in some cases like this year, they may even have a remote day so that we could actually have those students there. But there's a lot more preparation in getting ready for the ACT when we administer those on that day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other?
And I do understand that. Thanks for that answer, but I'm fine approving the calendar the way it is, but I mean, I think that teachers, and this is just my personal opinion, which is probably not worth much, I don't know if there's an advantage to doing that quarterly unless it's just a refresher of the soul for the teachers. I think every day, I know like when I was teaching, we stress over every single day we have of instruction time, so that just may be food for future thought.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any, I don't see any more lights, motion, I'll entertain a motion at this time. Mr. Lindsay made a motion to approve the calendars as presented. Mr. Sims seconds the motion. Seeing no further discussion, I think we're prepared to vote.
Please vote now.
All right, with a vote of 9-1, the calendars are approved for the next 2 years. The grant MOU, Mr. Gaines.
Again, I think some of you had some questions about the research opportunity that we have as a part of the. We had an opportunity to apply for a grant, and we sat down with those 3 schools who were eligible and talk with them about the grant requirements and about ways that we, because we knew there were some requirements that we had to provide part of the funding for a coach that would work in the schools, that would work as a part of this research. Verizon and Westat Research would do the research. As a part of that, though, we had to supply a part of a person. They fund $25,000, we fund the other part. So, of the schools that are eligible, they are all Title I schools, and we looked at the opportunities, and they all agreed that they would work with their teams to provide the other half of that, so they would have that coach there that would be able to help us in the event that we were to get the grant. As a part of the grant, this just helps us to move along in the event that we qualify, and we should know in the next few days here whether or not we qualify for the last stage. This agreement gives us opportunity to allow for them to come in and do research.
Okay, any discussion on, are we voting on just the application for the grant?
You're voting on just the agreement to do the research, which is
if the grant's awarded, so
yes.
we're not giving you permission, you've
haven't
already
got-
applied,
Yes,
basically, is what I'm asking.
yes.
Okay. Any discussion? Are we committed to anything beyond this academic year?
We won't be committed to anything until we actually, and you want to talk more to it? Yes, sir. Sure, for sure.
So technically, until we get the approval, we're not committed to anything.
Right.
But it would be a 3-year, essentially a 3-year plan, if we were to get approved. So it would be up to 3 years. And what this really is, it says that they're gonna give us up to $400 to even take care of the research and stuff. That's kind of what the MOU talks about, but it's so that they can talk to teachers, principals, students, and parents to ask their opinion on how it went.
Okay, I guess my only concern is adding a staff person who we may end up stuck with after, that sounded really horrible, that we may be committed to after 3 years. Are we setting ourselves up for a situation like that?
So all 3 schools, based on conversations we had with them, plan on to use someone there that's already essentially doing this job, just doing it on side of being a teacher as well. So, I mean, once the 3rd year's up, technically you can apply for a 4th year, but once it's up, that it would still be somebody that's been in-house.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to make sure we weren't adding someone that we may be responsible for down the road. Any other questions on this? Have a motion for Ms. Kinzer to approve, seconded by Ms. Hopkins. All right, I am gonna ask one last basic question, Mr. Gaines, and this is, I guess my own confusion. What do we benefit from this?
In, all 3 middle schools, we will receive, and he could probably tell you exactly the devices, what we get.
Okay, so it's
for that.
devices we would be getting as a part of the research? Okay, then I don't need any other information. Thank you. All right, we're, no other questions, we're ready to vote.
Please vote now.
All right, that vote's 9-1, and I, assume you'll keep us posted as the results are distributed regarding the grant. Zoning and facilities, updated policy, Mr. Perriman.
Good evening, this is policy, 3.21.11. This is the policy that we discussed at the work session that would set the sizes for new project planning or any expansion to current buildings.
Have a motion from Mr. Lindsay, seconded from Ms. Parker. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I think we're prepared to vote.
Please vote now.
The vote of 8-2, the policy, updated policy passes.
8.32 are the zoning plan, the options that we discussed at the work session. Our recommendation on the elementary plan is to adopt option 2. Then we also presented you, 2 options or 2 areas for consideration on the high school that would be moved from Spring Hill High School to Central High School. And we just provided those to you, but we do recommend option 2 on the elementary plan.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Lindsay.
Motion to approve option number 2 on the elementary plan, and, I can stick them both together, we can separate the high school option if.
Let's separate it just for
All right.
clarity. Seconded by Mr. Sims.
Motion to approve option 2, elementary,
Yes. Elementary proposal number 2.
of the zoning plan is
Mr. Lindsay made the motion, Mr. Sims seconded.
May I clarify one thing, Mr. Fulbright?
Yes.
In option 2, even though we're saying that's an elementary plan, we did discuss that there would be an addition to Hampshire and a small addition to Santa Fe, and those are K-12 additions.
Correct. Thank you.
Please vote now.
All right, with a vote of 10-0, that, plan is passed. Now, moving on to the next one, Mr. Lindsay.
Motion to approve, and maybe Mr. Pearman may describe this better than me, but motion to approve both areas to be rezoned to Columbia Central.
Correct. We label, in the transportation world, we call one the Shantae Acres area, and the second we call, south of Bear Creek Pike. Basically,
Okay.
the Sawmill Pike area, those are the two that are reflected on your map.
Okay. Seconded by Mr. Moore. Motion was made by Mr. Lindsay. The motion, to, how did you phrase it? To approve the say it better. You said it good first time.
I can't remember what I said. Motion to approve CHS option that was presented at board meeting, including,
It would be option one, it's the only option we
Right,
gave you is the
right.
two.
Okay.
I'm loading the document. Can you tell me how many students this was, it's not coming up.
The actual number of students is about 156, however, only around 100 to 110 would actually be affected because the remainder of those students either go out of zone already to Central or they are out of zone somewhere else. Now, that could be applied, you know, we have some kids in that area that go to Mount Pleasant or go to Culleoka. Those are always your odd numbers, but a good portion of those kids in those two areas do go out of zone to Central. I think 108 would be the total number that would be affected that don't currently attend Central, but would be zoned to that area.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we're prepared to vote. Mr. Moore.
Please vote now.
Vote of 9-1, that plan passes as well. Going into policy. Policy, is number 4 just saying that we're going into policy, or is there a specific policy with number 4? Okay, policy 1.206. Mr. Wilver?
Sorry, it's been a while since I drafted these.
Mr. Hickman just said, that's Jake. All right, so that's why I called on you, sorry.
That's okay. But policy 1 was the original version, or the revision, I guess it should say original policy, draft. And then, I believe that was for, I'm sorry, let me get back to the original policy. Giving the chair the ability to stop compensation for a board member that's been absent at 3 consecutive meetings at which the board votes, so that would not include work sessions. The second revision opens that up a little bit more and would just be any noticed meeting of the Maury County Board of Education, so that would include work sessions and regular monthly meetings. And then the third option, if I remember correctly, would take that discretion away from the chair, and the board would have to vote to withhold compensation, but it would still be for any meeting that's noticed to the public.
Thank you. Ms. Kinzer?
I won't make a motion, but I like the original one best. I understand voting is where we're, where we need them to be. I want the chairman to have that opportunity to deal with it rather than the board dealing with it, so that, for me, eliminates option 3. So, I move we accept, option 1.
Have a motion for option 1. Second.
Can I second that with the caveat that we
Sure.
waive the posting requirement? Can
Yes,
that be
yes,
included
yes.
in?
Yes.
Yes, of
Yes,
course.
you may.
I just think
Yeah.
batted this around for a while, so if we could waive the posting and make this
Let's waive
effective
the
if we,
posting. That should be part of the motion.
The original
in a second.
of the 3 voting meetings,
Yeah.
that's it, the one, just for clarification, just so everybody knows, that's the
Right.
one we're going with. All right, do you have anything else, Ms. Parker? You just want to second that with that clarification? Any other discussion? I think we're ready to vote.
Please vote now.
On a vote of 8-2, that policy is updated. Policy 6.206.
That one is mine.
That one's yours.
Yes, that's the transfer within the system, and we have batted that one back and forth as well. We went with, having a percentage, without a percentage, and what we did was we listened, took notes on everything you said, and basically we went back to the original policy, and because it added in some of the procedural things anyway you guys had requested to be in it. So we took that back and we corrected it with the other considerations that we had discussed you wanted. So I present to you, if you'll look at I believe it's the final one on there, it's the revised 6206, number 2. And this would be the 4th version, I believe.
Have a motion from Mr. Lindsay, seconded from Mr. Hooper. Yeah. No, you can keep looking, 'cause I got a question or two. We're not ready to vote yet. Where did I see this? So the determination if a school is at capacity is gonna be determined through the central office? At discretion?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I can't see what it totally covers my screen. Is there a way to take the vote off, can I see it? Sorry. I just wanna read it, the very final one, 'cause the wording. Yeah, I can't get it. It totally covers my screen.
All right, there it is.
Sorry.
Ms. Irvin?
Mr. Hickman, I'm trying to read through this, but I know everybody's, I feel like, waiting on me, and I'm sorry for that. Does this one mention anything about, like, the 90%? I'm guessing that it doesn't. I don't see it on here.
No, it does not. At the last meeting, it was recommended to take that back out.
So basically, what has changed here?
If you look through the redlined, the areas that have red, we have a no transfer considered period. We have, a generalized statement where it says where the school has not reached capacity. Because we talked in the last meeting that we need to be careful about putting just a generalized school, because we know there might be we need to consider grade levels as well at capacity.
Correct.
So that's why we distinguished that language to change to that. And then at the very end, this kind of answers the question previously, was the superintendent or my designee will have the right to terminate any transfers.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lindsay?
If the attachment above that, Mr. Hickman put some procedures in there. I don't know if you guys haven't read over those, but one of those procedures, is actually a procedure we have now that says that, out-of-zone, approvals will not exceed 5% of the projected enrollment at the school. I would like to make an amendment to the motion just to put that into policy rather than procedure. So my amendment would be between paragraphs 1 and 2 to add this sentence that says, out-of-zone approvals will not exceed 5% of the projected enrollment of the school and will not cause classrooms to exceed state enrollment regulations. So I'd like to put that in the form of an amendment.
Okay, we have an amendment to the policy, seconded by Ms. Parker.
Yes, you want me to read it again?
Yeah, it's just taking number 7 off of the procedures page and placing it inside the policy, the last policy, page.
Right, and adding the phrase, will not cause classrooms to exceed state enrollment regulations.
Okay. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Ms. Irvin?
Just, Mr. Lindsay, would you mind, what was the 5% again? 5% of what?
Out-of-zone approvals will not exceed 5% of the projected enrollment of the school, which is a current procedure we have now that just hasn't been followed, but.
So basically, if the school house is 700, then we'd be capping that to 35 kids.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, is there any other discussion on the amendment? Mr. Sims?
Just a quick question. How many schools would this currently affect? I mean, as far as, I know Hampshire's way over 5%, but how many other schools are over the 5% threshold?
Well, the zoning plan capped Hampshire's ability to do that tonight.
Right, yeah.
Because they will now have a zone that does not allow them that number. I think they are the only one that was above the 5%. And I may be misspoken on that, but I think they are the only one that was above the 5%.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, we will vote on the amendment as Mr. Lindsay presented. Vote of 7-3, the amendment passes. So we'll now go back to the policy as amended. Are there any other questions or discussion on the policy as amended? Seeing none, I will vote.
And you're asking to waive rules on this one also?
Yes, correct. Oh, has anybody made a motion even? That's what I thought, yeah. Okay, so you made the motion. Who seconded your, it was Mr. Hooper. Mr. Hooper, sorry about that. Mr. Lindsay and Mr. Hooper, a motion and second. Yes, and that, Jake mentioned that. Is that okay with both of you guys? Okay. Okay. Right. Okay, then I'm fine with leaving that off then. Yeah, okay, let's do that then. Okay, so we are not waiving the posting, we are approving it now. We are ready to vote.
Please vote now.
What do you think? Let me check on that. Or check with Jake, make sure. All right, with a vote of 7-3, the policy passes as amended, not waiving the posting. Okay. Policy 6.304. A lot of red in this one. Got a motion to approve from Ms. Parker? second from Ms. Kinzer. Any discussion?
The board edited is the one, I think it has all the red lines through it, which if you take all the lines out of it, the revised policy is the cleaned up version. The board edited is just showing what we're taking out and adding. And this was the one, the only reason that we brought it up was this was the one that had to have, we decided that we needed to take names out and put positions.
So the one we're voting on is the board edited edition? Is that my understanding? Okay, just wanna make sure cause there's 3 attached here.
What you have is the board edited, like I said, it's lined out, has all the red in it, what's changed. Then we included the original so you could see that, and then the final is the cleaned up version without all the markings and the reds and the...
Okay, so it's all the same except for the original?
Except for the original, correct.
Okay, so we are doing the revised. Okay, yes. Motion and seconded has approved to waive that posting as a part of their motion. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. On a vote of 10-0, that policy is approved and the posting is waived. Policy 6.3041.
This was the policy that TSBA alerted us that we're out of compliance because we do not have one now. And this one, the only thing that I went back to do was make sure we changed out names, put positions, and included a generalized email that will go to whoever's attached to that position.
Have a motion to approve and waive from Mr. Moore, seconded by Mr. Hooper. To approve this and waive the posting. Any discussion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. On a vote of 10-0, that passes and is waived. Instructional low bids, operation low bids, anything from y'all on that? Then let's go to number 3, kids on stage. Mr. Hickman, would you give us an update where we stand with this?
Chair Fulbright and myself, we met with the kids on stage, committee, council, and at that point, we spoke with them and kind of voiced some of the concerns of the school district as well as the board. The points that we did make was we were concerned about the attachment of pay that is funneled through Murray County Public Schools and some of the unintended consequences that is occurring, such as retirement and some of the other benefits. They understood that, and they are going to go back to committee, if I understood correctly, and talk about a way to pay that additional stipend through the KOS funds, not through the Murray County funds. We also spoke to them about the, one of the other things I spoke to them about was having a true measurement of what are they calling success. Are we making sure that we're aligning it to the community needs? And they agreed upon that as well, thinking that would probably be a good measure for them to look at what would be considered their success for that program, how are they measuring that program, and I have to find my notes. Third thing we talked about.
Oh, I know one thing we talked about, the inequities of offerings from school to school.
Yeah. And we also talked about the inequities of what they were offering from Mount Pleasant versus Murray County, because it was our understanding that this was going to be a Murray County initiative. They did explain to us that they could not fund all schools. They felt like this would water down the funds and make the program so watered down that it would be ineffective and not to do it as well. So we talked about them to coming up with a model and helping us recruit other schools and businesses to replicate what they're doing at other schools, and they were agreeable to do those as well.
Thank you. A few of my thoughts, following that meeting. One of the things I think we've run into is this program was designed as an arts program and has now transformed into a science-heavy program. And I think that happened without the board knowing it, pretty much. And I conveyed to them that I think it's put them in a bad situation and us in a bad situation because of a lack of communication between the two groups that needed to be communicating. I expressed to them on behalf of the board that we've had a very good relationship for 20-some years now, and we don't want to just chunk that because we've run into some questions here. I do think that they were very receptive on helping us model this in some of our other schools. I think that that's something that is on their long-range schedule from what I heard. And I do think that we as a board have tasked Mr. Hickman with goals, short-term goals, long-term goals for our system, and he needs to determine if this is a part of those goals. You don't have to answer that tonight, but that's one of the things you're going to be tasked with. Is there any other discussion on this matter? Mr. Howe.
So I thought something that was interesting was, as we were talking to them, he was sharing his vision, how their group grew. They started to talk about that it's not just Mount Pleasant businesses that are contributing. He mentioned, I know Murray Regional was one, I think Columbia Machine Works was another. So to say that it was not a Mount Pleasant thing, they even said that, you know, he kind of said two things. One point he said, we really want to focus on Mount Pleasant, and then he turned around and said at the same time, but we're recruiting businesses outside of Mount Pleasant to be a part of this organization with the promise to grow it bigger. So, I mean, I felt like there was a little conflict within their own organization of what they're trying to say. I think this is something that we should continue. I think we've had a good relationship with them. Like you said, I don't think we should chuck this out the window, but I think this is something we should look into. If they're ready to go bigger, what we can do to help them. I don't want to replicate this at one school or another school or another school, and that's not really fair to our community, because although you could maybe replicate this in Spring Hill, you could maybe replicate it in Columbia. It'd be hard to do that at Santa Fe or at Culleoka or at Hampshire. There's not that much industry there, so we would be kind of pulling all different ways when I think that we have a framework here that we could maybe make this work across our entire county. Is it gonna be easy? No, it's gonna take some work, but I think we could. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Parker.
Mr. Howell, I heard similar comments from the leadership that was here that night, but I think it's important that we actually look at the facts, and the facts are that it's not kids on stage, it's kids on stage of Mount Pleasant. It's not kids on stage of Murray County, it's kids on stage of Mount Pleasant. So if they want to grow it bigger than just Mount Pleasant, they're probably going to want to adjust their name and whatnot. They've obviously adjusted what the focus is, and personally, I don't have a problem with what their focus is. My problem stems simply from the fact that we've created an inequity in our system. It's been a documented inequity for at least 3 years. We've conveyed that to multiple people, and nothing's been done about it. I know you mentioned that, you know, there are other entities that are putting money in. If you actually go and look at GuideStar and you pull up their tax documents, it's not a bunch of different entities. It's Smelter that's putting the money in, and I appreciate what they're doing, and I have no problem with what they're doing. But again, I feel like there is a better way for this to be done that doesn't actually create the inequities that we've been trying to avoid in our system. And I'm not saying that I want the whole thing thrown out. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What I am bothered by, though, is that we have a contract that was, or MOUs, that we as a board did not approve. And we just approved an MOU tonight for a grant that, you know, involves far greater amounts of money. But are we just going to let this one slide? to me, if we want to approve this MOU, then let's approve this MOU. Let's make that motion tonight. Otherwise, I think we need to have I think that it would be better if we have a new MOU with this entity starting January 1. And I'm not saying I want it to go away, but I'm saying if this is something that Director Hickman thinks that we need to continue, at least for the next 6 months, then let's get his signature on it and let's get it approved by the board in the proper way, as opposed to allowing something that was done incorrectly to just continue on.
Thank you. Mr. Moore?
I just want to make a motion to exercise the 30-day out, or to terminate on all of these MOUs, please.
I have a motion to terminate the MOU with Kids on Stage. Is there a second? Okay, I have a second from Ms. Parker. Mr. Moore?
Okay, thank you. And if I want to clarify that too, because as Ms. Parker had said, this isn't something I necessarily want to see go away. This was just handled wrong from day one. And it's been made clear by the board that it was handled wrong, that the board didn't approve of how this had been handled, and this has been going on for several years, and I just can't allow it to continue. It's unequal in how it's distributed on the funding. The fact that it costs the district money for the salary portions that are going into these, as well as retirement, it just should not have been done this way from the beginning. And in my opinion, just as one board member, to allow that to continue is just irresponsible of us. Obviously, other people may disagree with that. And to go with that, I would encourage Mr. Hickman, if he does believe this is something, an arrangement that we need to continue, then we have 30 days to figure out another way, and he can obviously bring us something back that does not, that meets the constraints, that don't tie us in under payroll, that still allows the partnership to continue for the next 6 months until he figures out what he wants to do otherwise. But along with Ms. Parker, I still think this needs to be a fresh and clean document that comes in some way that the current superintendent brings us, and we as a board approve, rather than how this was handled previously, and we just let it ride.
Mr. Lindsey?
Mr. Wilbur, if I may, what would be ramifications as far as if this motion passes, as far as salaries that may be owed, because I think we're kind of dealing with two groups of people with this group of MOUs. We have some that are receiving supplements, and then we have some that are fully funded through an MOU. Looking through those, if this passes and we enact this clause, and then we don't come up with a solution in the next 30 days, and this just ends, what responsibilities do we as a board or we as a system have?
So the supplemented employees, your principals, those do have 30-day provisions. You have a contract with those with those principals that I took a look at. The contract that was signed has the total amount of what would be the salaried or the scheduled salary that you've approved, plus the Kids on Stage supplement. So just with the supplemented employees, the principals, if you invoke the 30-day provision in those MOUs, the contract says if you take away duties, then you have the right to reduce the salary appropriately. So presumably, those would just come back down to your scheduled salary level, and the additional duties would go away. The non-supplemented, the other folks, there's no 30-day provision in the other employees' MOUs. So if you do away with those provisions, they've got a contract. I mean, they've got a 12-month contract with you. So those do not have 30-day outs. These are the non-principal positions. I think you as a board are going to have to come up with a way to fund those if you do away with the relationship with Kids on Stage. And Mr. Lucona can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, or Mr. Hickman, but that's the way I interpret it, that if you set those MOUs aside, those positions are going to have to be funded because you've got a contract with those folks that runs 12 months.
Mr. Lucona, I'm going to jump in. Mr. Lucona, would that come out of fund balance, or do we have the money laying around that we could do that?
I mean, we don't have money laying around to pay the people we have, so.
So that would have to come out of fund balance. Thank you.
Just to ask Mr. Wilbur another question, so those fully funded positions, would we be in breach of contract if, if we don't have a 30-day out clause in those? I'm struggling with how we would dissolve that relationship. And then, to piggyback off of that, if we did just choose to enact that 30-day clause on those supplemented positions, what happens if Kids on Stage then decide that we're pulling out totally? I assume by what you just said that we're still bound to pay those contracted employees, no matter whether the revenue's there or not. So I assume that they have, if we can pull out, then they can pull out, I guess.
Yes, I mean, if there's nothing to stop them. If you say, no, we're gonna do away with those contracts, I think they could make the argument that, at least as to the supplemented employees, that it's a package deal, that's required in order for them to perform on the others. I mean, they could make that argument and try to cancel those contracts also. If they did, I mean, then you have to make a decision. Do you keep that employee on, or do you let that employee go and say, no, you know, our performance in that contract was contingent on Kids on Stage putting up the funds to do that. They're no longer doing that. Your recourse is against Kids on Stage, not us. I mean, I don't know exactly where all that would pan out if Kids on Stage, I mean, if you just terminated the supplements for the supplemented employees and say, no, we're taking you back to scheduled salaries, and they decide, well, no, it was a package deal, we're pulling out of the MOUs altogether, you got a mess on your hands. And I can't tell you exactly how all that's gonna play out. It's gonna come back to you to decide whether or not you're gonna pay for those full-time positions. And if you choose not to, then if I'm the person in that position, you know, obviously I'm gonna be looking at somebody for a breach of contract, whether it's the board or whether it's Kids on Stage. I can't tell you how that'll play out, but I'm presuming some things that will happen down the road.
I guess this is also for you, Mr. Williver. Does it matter if these contracts were signed, I don't know if illegally is the correct word, but, I mean, Mr. Marzak, Dr. Marzak didn't have legal standing to even put these into place. Does that have any bearing on the contracts?
Just arguing devil's advocate on, or playing out the other side of that. Kids on Stage assumed that your superintendent had the authority to enter into that MOU. He was your apparent agent at the time. You might have a claim against Dr. Marzak for doing something that he shouldn't have done without authority to do that. But as far as Kids on Stage, I mean, I think they had the reasonable right to rely on Dr. Marzak's assertions that he could sign those contracts. So, I mean, I think just from an agency standpoint, he was able to bind you. Now, whether he breached his agreement with you is a whole nother matter.
Okay, and, I mean, as far, from our previous discussion at the work session, there's no policy or anything that prevents an outside agency or one of our employees from taking a second job, which would basically, if Kids on Stage wish to continue to supplement the principals, that they can. Now, the whole the ones who are fully funded is a whole different issue. I still am trying to think through, but, I mean, really, the principals can still be funded, not through us, however.
Correct. We already have in our budget where we're funding their pay, the administrators, what they would make on our scale. But, I believe I'm right there. And then they supplement the additional portion. But Doug, are they getting what they had, or are they doing it on a base zeros?
So, one of the principals that receives the supplement is not being paid per the administrator index what he should be paid. I haven't checked the other principal, but I'm almost certain that it's the same on that one, because it's almost like, back when the agreement was designed, they said, well, let's lower this person's pay a little bit, and then the supplement puts them up at such a high amount, they'll be fine with it. That's what it looks like what happened, but if you use the administrator index that all the principals are being paid off of, then one of the principals is being paid less than that index would say.
I think if I recall, Doug, I think it was they put them on the minimum for the index minimum for that administrator.
Rather than calculating his education and his and all that. Rather than calculating, based on the administrator index, what he specifically would be, they just said, well, this is the bottom. It's on the index, but it's not where he should be. So he would be at a different number.
Ms. Parker?
All right, 2 questions. One for you, Jake. So for the 2 positions that are not supplements tied to the principals, are you saying there is no 30-day out clause in those? So the motion itself would really just pertain to the principals, is that correct?
Well, as I understand the motion, it was to do away with all the MOUs.
Motion was with any contract with 30-day out.
Okay, then yes, it would, if that's the case, it only applies to the supplemented employees, the principals, yeah.
Okay. The other question, I guess this is a question for you, Doug, but, how is this reflected in the budget that we approved last year, with regards to these 2 additional positions, full-time positions that are down there?
So it was budgeted basically the same as the previous year. We did a carryover budget, which, we're living with today, which is not very fun, because that's why you see so many amendments. But no, it was budgeted the exact same based on the previous MOU. So the budget, was not adjusted for any new MOU that we didn't know was signed. So it was based on the previous year's budget.
So are the numbers that are in there now reflective of what's in our current year's budget?
Yes, it is, but we passed a status quo budget. So there's attrition, there's
Right.
a bunch of mess in there from the previous year that doesn't make it clear whether this specific position was budgeted for specifically what is being paid. So, and my assumption is and I don't have to assume, I can look at our financials and say there's not enough money in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
But part of my question is, when we approved the budget and it was a carryover budget, my understanding is that it didn't necessarily include all the amendments, or did it include all the amendments that we had made the previous year?
It did not.
Because last year, we had to do an amendment to get Kids on Stage revenue into our budget, correct?
I'd have to check back on the
I'm pretty sure we did, because that was
voting
one of the things that we had to approve on it. So I guess what I'm saying is, to me, this is just further proof that we as a board had no knowledge of this. And that's where I have problems with it. It's not that I want to take this position away from Mount Pleasant, or I don't want them to have it. I want them to have it. I truly do. But as a board, when things are not done according to the way that they're supposed to be done, that's where I struggle. Like, what's the point of me being away from my family tonight if an outgoing superintendent that had been non-renewed at that point is able to turn around and sign a contract to obligate this board and Murray County taxpayers to potentially pay for employees that we never approved as a part of our budget? Like, there's just something inherently wrong about this. And that's part of the reason why I'm supportive of what Mr. Moore is saying, because I really it's not that I want to do away with these, I just want them to be cleaned up. And if they're cleaned up, then we as a board can go forward and we can approve these if that's what we want to do. We don't know what they will look like until there's some discussion with Kids on the Stage. But this has been on our agenda for months now, and that's part of the reason why I feel like We're at a point where we've said, hey, this is what we want, this is what we want, this is what we want, and nothing happens. For 3 years, nothing has happened based on what the board has said. Somebody else has undermined what this board has directed, and the only way that we as a board can speak is through a motion. I'm happy to look at what that motion can be if people don't like Mr. Moore's, but I think there needs to be some direction that this board gives. And if it is, we want to continue with Kids on Stage as is, then we need to make that motion if this motion fails. I think that's really important for this board to speak definitively on this arrangement as it currently stands. And I do want us to try to work through it and try to make it beneficial for these employees, but not to the point where it creates an inequity in our system that we know has existed for years. And we just kept kicking this can down the road, so let's stop kicking the can.
Just to piggyback off of that, I think that that's kind of where this ties into a lot of our ways of doing things as a board. We would be making a statement, we would be teaching a lesson, but that person's not here anymore. So I think going forward, we need to look at how we progress, and this is where I said this will be charged to Mr. Hickman. Yeah, it was fouled up in the past, there's no doubt. We were left out of that whole transformation process, the contract part of it. But if we're gonna make a point, we're gonna be handcuffing the people that are here based off the actions of those who were here previous. So I just wanted to keep that in mind, because that seems to be a way that we've progressed with a lot of issues here lately. And I wanna make sure that we keep moving forward instead of looking backwards. Mr. Moore. No, Ms. Irvin.
I'm just still, I fully understand what's going on, everything you guys have said, I completely support and agree with. Maybe I'm new to this, because I know this has been going on for years, but, here's my thought. If we pass this motion as is, I mean, I'm also wanting to look at kind of, and maybe this is what you're saying, but what's done is done. And what are we indebting ourselves to, that if we leave this as is, at least until we can make it right? That's what I want to see. What is this going to cost us? Because I agree, everything you said, it was wrong, you shouldn't have done it. Fully support that. But if it's going to cost us, I don't know, I'm guessing half of 260 is 130. Is that what it's going to cost us now? I don't know. Maybe it's not. And then two, I'm thinking about the employee that's receiving that supplement and just trying to think like them for a minute, because I don't know that it's fair, perhaps. I mean, I know that they're getting this and other principals are not, and I get all that. But they have accepted this position thinking this was their salary, and I'm trying to think like them. I feel like if you were yanking X number of dollars, which to me seems significant, could be a mortgage payment away from me, I would immediately be looking for another job. Maybe I'm thinking too deep into this, and that's where I hope you guys can help me understand.
Okay, so if I could clarify that. Asking to execute the 30-day termination of these does not mean these have to go away. It was made clear to me at the meeting when the representative of Kids on Stage was here that they could find other ways to pay these leads the money that they want to pay. That seemed to be pretty clear from his commentary. I'm simply saying in the next 30 days that I don't see why again, we're already 30 days past when this, or it's more than 30 days at this point. We're actually more than 60, it would be more than 60 days total past the time we originally were told that they could find other ways to pay. I don't see why that can't happen in the next 30 days. And it doesn't mean that it can't be brought back to us, and I would encourage our superintendent to bring it back to us if this were to pass, and bring those back if he thinks this is good for the district, and then we can, as Ms. Parker said, as a board, approve this and move on. This is at a point now, I'm not going to keep just passing along and letting things ride. We just had a 20-minute discussion that we don't even have control over our own employees because of an agreement that was signed. If somebody doesn't see a fundamental problem with that, I don't know what else to tell you. We can't be letting these things just ride because they happened. Now maybe we need to choose to do something else, that's fine too, but I'm past the point of just letting things ride because it happened to be messed up, and let's just try to get by. It's fundamentally wrong, we've known it was wrong, and we shouldn't just let it ride. we should, as a board, take action where we should take action, which is to terminate that, and if it needs to be brought back, it can be brought back, and we vote on a new one and move forward with it outside of the payroll, as they've said they can do.
Hey, Jake, I have a quick question. If we do terminate, and it's specifically looking at the teachers that were fully paid, if an agreement comes through that Kids on Stage would continue to pay that out of their funds, I'm just seeing a lot of legal ramifications because they're not our employees. How would that work to have that happen? Because I know what we do with the grant position, but the grant position is they give us the money, we pay them through us. Do you see any problems, legally speaking, for the ones that they're going to be paying the full amount to?
So just for my purposes, that's not the motion that's on the table, but you're talking hypothetically what would happen if we went and just did away with all the MOUs, but went to a system where those positions were privately funded. I mean, we do that in a sense with some positions now. I mean, our SROs, for instance, you know, there are people in authority positions in our schools that we don't pay and directly employ. So is it possible? Yes. I mean, is it gonna take some doing? Yes. I mean, we need a very specific set of, we'll need a much more specific MOU and
Because remember, the SRO, they took all of that funds on theirself because they didn't want us to be their bosses. So we have really very limited authority over SROs.
Exactly, and there will be those kinds of situations where with an SRO, if we have a problem with an SRO, we have to take it up with the sheriff, and then it's the sheriff's responsibility to act or not act. You'd essentially be putting yourself in the same situation with Kids on Stage. Can it be done? Yes. Does it have some drawbacks from the board side? Yes. Do the drawbacks outweigh the potential benefits? I mean, that's something that you would have to be voted on and talked about. But it could be done, but it would be a much different scenario than what you have now.
Okay, for clarification, because the motion reads that we're gonna terminate all, I'm reading exactly what it says. Termination of all KOS MOUs which have a 30-day termination clause. How many is that?
4.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify.
4.
Okay. And let's,
And that was not said, it's a motion that if y'all want to word it a different way, let me
no,
know.
well, what I do want worded up there are which 4, so that we're not having this whole question come back up. What did we vote to close and what did we vote not to? We want clarity. Clarity is what we want. I want them listed. All 4. Mr. Lindsay.
This is gonna sound like a cop-out, but I agree with everybody. I get the total, I share the frustration, I share the idea of inequity, but just to be frank about it, the person that messed this up is not here anymore, and we can talk around if we want to, but we all know the former superintendent of schools did something without the prior board's knowledge, and we're in a mess because of it. It's not the only mess we're in because of decisions that he made, and I mean, we don't have to talk around that either. I do have a fear that if this motion passes, what happens if Kids on Stage, I don't know if they say we're out totally, I don't know where that leaves us. I do have that fear of the unknown, and then I'm willing to take this up at budget time. I'm willing to say right now that I will not vote for these MOUs as written at budget time. But ultimately, the person that messed it up, there's nothing we can do about it. But the people that will suffer from it are our employees. And I just kind of struggle with that. again, I talked with Mr. Hickman about it, and I'm gonna speak for him, but his recommendation was, to me, was let's finish out this year, look at it before next budget year, decide what this board wants to do. A month ago, I was not there. That was not, what I wanted to do, but the more I think about this, that, as I agree with Mr. Moore, this is messed up, but, I'm just afraid that if we take action now, it could be even more messed up, and, so that's just my opinion on it.
Thank you. Ms. Parker?
Mr. Lindsay, I agree with you. Unfortunately, having sat in this chair last year when this issue came up, I was assured then I wasn't going to be sitting in this seat. And I recognize that we have a different person sitting in that seat, but that wasn't the first time that complaint was made to that person. So, again, that's where I just have a little bit of hesitation, and I'm not putting that on Mr. Hickman. I recognize he's a different person, but I also think that for administrators to think that they still were going to be receiving a supplement when, I mean, our meetings are public, our minutes are public, all of that stuff is out there, for them to think I can still get paid and plan for my mortgage accordingly, I mean, I'm sorry. I think I think they made a poor decision if that's the case, because they were relying upon somebody that I did not rely upon, and just being very honest. I'm not going to talk around him anymore, but I didn't trust what he said then, and I recognize that we're dealing with the mess he created, but I also think that nobody else should have trusted what he said either. So for people to be relying upon that in making their financial decisions, it concerns me. To me, the biggest problem I've always had with these supplements, I don't know what these principals do that is any different from any other principal in our system. And I still have not seen anything presented to me from central office, from Kids on Stage, from anybody that shows what they do over and above what's done at Hampshire, what's done at Culleoka, what's done at Whitthorne, what's done at any other school. And that's the problem that I've got with it. So I'm not trying to attack people on this, but I'm just saying, if Mr. Hickman thinks that this is a good thing and that he wants to continue with this, I am fine with that. Bring that MOU with that arrangement to us in January if we exercise this termination clause, and let's all just sign off on it, so we're not just continually saying, oh, well, it was the last guy, oh, it was the last board, oh, it was the last superintendent. Let's own this. Let's own this.
Ms. Irvin?
If we do that, will there be any interruption in these employees' pay, Doug? Like if we terminate it now and it comes back in January and we do it the right way, is that going to mess anyone up?
Since we're in the 30-day period, we would continue to pay as normal until the agreement was terminated. I think if you decide to terminate the agreements and let that expire without action from the board, then we need to do a budget amendment removing the revenue we expect to receive from Kids on Stage, reducing our fund balance. And, I mean, technically, these positions, because we are so early in the year, the budget would be there to continue paying them. And so the superintendent wouldn't have to come to the board to continue paying them until they started exceeding budgets. But now that we know if the agreement is going to be terminated or not, we'd need to do a budget amendment to recognize that the agreement's been terminated, and that would hit our fund balance. So we could continue to pay until we have a definitive know that the Kids on Stage agreement is either, it's either here or not. And if it's not here, then I think it would be smart to build into the motion maybe a caveat for a budget amendment if this does follow through. But that's pending a decision from you all.
My only question, kind of going off of that, is our next board meeting to approve a new MOU would not occur before January 5th, which is 35 days after the termination of the deal. So there's 5 days we are already guaranteed not to be able to pay people, right?
Correct, and,
Thank you.
and to have that, yeah.
Mr. Willifer.
And procedurally on this, I mean, if the motion passes, that's only half of it. I mean, you've done away with the MOUs, but you still have the step that you've gotta take of actually reducing these principals' salaries, because the contract that they have is for the total amount of scheduled salary plus the supplement. So you then as a board are gonna have to make a determination and reset those. If the board says that, okay, now we're asking less duties of you, the MOU's gone, you've gotta take action to reset those salaries. So until you do that, you can do away with the MOU, salaries are gonna stay the same. At some point, you'll be coming out of pocket to fund that difference until you take action to do otherwise.
Ms. Kinzer.
I totally agree with you. I agree with all of you. But it just seems to me, we've got a new director, yes, this happened, shouldn't have happened, all that. It seems to me that he's not gonna enter into any contract with Kids on Stage in May or, without coming to us. He's not gonna do it, right? Okay.
Better not.
I would like to just let this finish through the year. All of these people that are receiving these supplements, they're not really a party to what happened and shouldn't have happened. We know that. I just think that in order for us to, and it is righting a wrong, you're absolutely right, as I agree with all of you. But I would prefer to do, as Mr. Hickman has recommended, let them finish the year, and then we need to really look hard, and maybe we need to be ongoing looking at it, but I don't think I can vote for the motion for that reason.
First of all, I appreciate that we are looking at this, and I would agree with everybody to this point. You know, these contracts, their MOUs were mishandled. However, what I do really want to express to all of you is, you know, unfortunately I have to adopt the sins of my father. This happened. I am very worried on many aspects of some of the conversation we're having, because some of the words that we're just throwing out there seems easy, but it's not. We could be in danger of severing a relationship that has stepped up to really try to benefit kids of Murray County. I know it's Mount Pleasant, but it's kids of Murray County. Their full focus is they want to show kids pathways outside of just typical jobs that kids before were landing in. I don't want to sever that relationship with Kids on Stage. Do I agree with some of the premises they have? Absolutely not. Do I think some of it needs to be reined in? Absolutely. I don't think we need to start developing classes just because it sounds cool or it's fad or it's, hey, this would be a neat thing to have. We need to do it with purpose. So I do agree with all of you that we do need to make sure that our hand is heavily on what initiatives are sparked at these Kids on Stage schools. We've already been in talks with them. We've already had to shoot down one program that they try to run through because we felt that that was not indicative of what Murray County needs. You ask, well, it's easy enough, let's let Mr. Hickman come back to the floor and have have his MOU. Basically, we'll have 5 days to come up with an MOU to talk with an organization that can't even promise me that I can get even one of them to talk to in the next 5 days to try to come up with a resolution. In 5 days, because we have to post these 5 days out from the next board session, which is in 2 weeks. So I'm worried that if we press that, you're leaving me in a position where I can't promise you I can get that done because I can't promise you that I can get a hold of these Kids on Stage people to come talk to me to help come with a resolution. And by doing this, they may decide they don't even want to come to the table with a resolution any longer. So my recommendation moving forward, as much as it hurts, as much as it goes against the grain, as I fully believe that let's go ahead and honor an MOU that I know that you did not want to pass, but did. Kids on the stage saw Dr. Marzak as the agent of the board. Otherwise, I think if they would have saw it any other way, they would have wanted it to go through the right channels and avenues. I don't think they would have tried to trick the board. So let's collectively use the next couple of months to try to work through these MOUs, to have them written in a way that you guys would like to see them. I'd rather try to enter into writing these new MOUs on a positive step than starting on a negative step saying, you're canceled. Let's come back to the board. So that is my recommendation.
Thank you. And I think we have one more comment on tap from Mr. Howell. Nope, okay. I'm not seeing any other lights on for discussion, so we are prepared to vote on termination of the 4 contracts listed that have 30-day out clauses with the Kids on Stage organization. If you vote for this, you will be voting to cancel or enact the 30-day clause. If you vote no, you will be keeping the situation as is currently. Let's vote.
Please vote now.
The vote of 6-4, that motion fails. Is there a second motion that we need to take up with this item? Can the chair make a motion? I'm gonna make a motion that we approve this tonight. And based off the discussions we've had, this is not part of my motion. My motion is to approve this MOU the correct way. But I do want to add that we have made it extremely clear that this is only to correct it for the rest, or this is only to cover for the rest of the year, and this will look very different next year. I know there's a lot of skepticism probably on that, but we also have a very different group of people leading our district in a lot of different ways. So that is my motion. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion? I think we've had very thorough discussion, very helpful discussion. If not, let's vote.
Please vote now.
The vote of 7-3, that motion passes. I would like to take the opportunity, and I was hoping he would stay around to hear it. Dr. Penner and the group from Battle Creek Middle has graciously decorated our desk up here this evening, so I want to say a special thanks to them for all the great artwork. Are there any other announcements or topics we need to discuss for the board? Ms. Parker.
I do just want to say, for the work session, I would like to have a discussion about setting the agenda, because there have been some things that have been added on. I mean, Mr. Hickman, you mentioned that, you know, you would need to have the MOUs on there in 2 weeks or whatnot. There were things that were loaded today for us to review. And I just think we need to be very careful about that. So I would love to see us have a discussion at the work session about that. For me to be prepared to speak at this meeting on certain items, I've got to have plenty of time, and I cannot guarantee you that if something gets uploaded at 5 o'clock on the Monday of our meeting, that I will have time to fully vet that item.
Was there an item other than the calendar that was added today?
And just the repayment plan, what happened there, it was loaded into a different area, so we deleted it and put it back up.
When was it originally loaded?
Last week.
Last week? Thank you.
Yeah, we did have it changed, but one of the problems is on that one, and I want to speak specifically, was we had the break, and when it was submitted, we wanted it to be more detailed for you, so we asked, because of the holidays, it really heard us, so we did have some additional, we had where he had put what specific fundraisers he was gonna do. We told him to go back and we want you to put what you expect to make from these to make that money.
If we can just have a discussion going forward about when the agendas are actually set. Previously, before we had the benefit of this system, things got set a week out, and board members used to get, packets of information, that were provided. And so I just really think that we need to look at how we do this going forward, and make sure that we're all on the same page. I understand things come up, but when changes get made and they don't get relayed to the board in a timely manner, that makes it difficult.
Any other comments or actions that we need to take? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Yeah, actually, Robert's Rules of Order says that that's one that does not have to be voted on by the board.